Well, hey everyone, welcome. So glad you're with us today as we continue this teaching series through the Song of Songs, the wisdom of romantic love. We're in week 4 today, and we're finally coming to the big day, the wedding day. All the waiting is over. It's the wedding day, and it's huge. I mean, like it was for you or for others that you've seen. Yeah, I wish today we could just share some wedding stories. The best wedding you ever witnessed, the most unusual, the most tragic wedding you've ever seen where things have gone awry. It's one of the real downsides of the big day. It's such a big deal that there's a lot that can go wrong. I was reading this week about just all the sorts of things that happen at weddings. Logistical problems. The cake isn't delivered. The photographer doesn't show up. Somehow the bridal gown gets locked in a closet that's deadbolted and nobody can find the key. I read about a groom who just minutes before the ceremony sat down on the front row with his grandma and split his pants. That delayed things for a while. We know of all the social faux pas that can go wrong. People who are drunk or who are fighting or who, make inappropriate speeches. I read about a maid of honor who was doing the toast, and she didn't toast the couple. She just took the floor and used the opportunity to announce her own pregnancy, which she was so proud of. Good for her, but bad timing. I read about how nature can interfere in things. A window left open, a squirrel came in and started eating the wedding cake. A dog chewed the sleeve off the bride's gown. Talking about nature interfering tragically, I read about a grandpa who died in the bathroom just minutes before the ceremony was supposed to begin. But maybe the most tragic thing I read in all its ugly simplicity was the bride who said, "I realized I didn't love my husband while we had our first dance." That is tragic. And yet, now here's the thing. The reason I say all this is for all that can go wrong on a wedding day, let alone for all that can go wrong in a marriage, we keep coming back to it. We will not be done with it. There has never been a society on earth in which marriage wasn't central and wedding days weren't significant. Right down to our time and place today, where we seem like, marriage being so disparaged and devalued, people still get married. People still have weddings. Oddly, maybe even after living together for 5 years, already bearing children, they come finally to get married. And they bring everyone together and they're having their ceremony and they're crying. The husband and the wife are crying, and any number of people in the audience or in the wedding party are crying. And you might ask yourself, why? They've been living married for 5 years. They have a family already, for goodness sakes. Why are they crying? Because now they can finally have socially sanctioned sex? Is that it? Don't think so. And now they get the tax benefit of being married filing jointly? I don't think that's what brings the tears. What brings the tears is the recognition that these two really do love each other. And that what was before a couple, but a couple of individuals, is truly now a couple. A new kind of entity. The two are becoming one in every way, and people weep. Weddings are significant, and they are meant to be. In fact, that's the title of today's message, what every wedding is meant to be. Now, we're going to cover some ground today because we're going from chapter 3, verse 6, all the way through to 5, verse 1. It's all the wedding. And so we're going to break it up in chunks, going to read it, comment on it. I want to make a number of points about what every wedding is meant to be and what it actually is. But I want to do it pretty efficiently because we've got a story to share with you at the end. I hope you'll stay tuned all the way through. So let's begin in chapter 3 with verses 6 through 11. Who is this coming up from the wilderness like a column of smoke? perfumed with myrrh and incense, made from all the spices of the merchant. Look, it is Solomon's carriage, escorted by 60 warriors, the noblest of Israel, all of them wearing the sword, all experienced in battle, each with his sword at his side, prepared for the terrors of the night. King Solomon made for himself the carriage. He made it of wood from Lebanon. Its posts he made of silver, its base of gold. Its seat was upholstered with purple, and its interior inlaid with love. Daughters of Jerusalem, come out, and look, you daughters of Zion. Look on King Solomon wearing a crown, the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding, the day his heart rejoiced. All right, what is going on here? We said at the beginning of this series that the title of this book really is the Song of Songs. It's not the Song of Solomon. It was maybe written to Solomon, as a piece of wisdom literature under Solomon being like the patron saint of wisdom. It might actually have been written against Solomon because the one area of his life in which he chose to be wise in his own eyes was in his romantic life. He had this massive harem. He totally transgressed God's standards for marriage. And so this might actually be written against Solomon. But now, why is Solomon appearing here? Is the writer trying to draw a contrast between Solomon, his opulent wealth, but his debased sex life, versus this country couple? Is Solomon here a foil? Is he trying to insert himself? Like, here's wedding day, but here comes Solomon trying to grab this woman and take her into his harem before this shepherd boy can marry her? Is that what it's about? Well, I don't think it's really either of those things. I think really Solomon here is an image. He's an icon. The best of Solomon, his wealth and his prestige. It's like this bride is seeing her groom come and saying, he's King Solomon to me. I know we're not rich. I know we don't have everything that Solomon has, but this is my king. And here he comes. Who is this? Here is Solomon's arrival for the wedding day. And it just reminds me of this. Every wedding is royal. Every wedding is a royal wedding. I mean, especially if you're a Christian, because you're a son or a daughter of God. You're royalty already, your identity in Christ. And so a wedding, every wedding is a royal wedding. And one of the things that does kind of justifies the expense. Because for most of us, weddings are terribly expensive events. And, sometimes it can go over the top, right? We've all been at those weddings where we're looking around like, this is just stupid. What a waste. But what we don't want to do is fall into the trap of being just super practical and pragmatic. Like in the Bible where they're like, why this waste? This money, could have been given to the poor. Remember when that was said? When the woman took the expensive jar of perfume and poured it over Jesus' feet. Why this waste? Why this extravagance? Well, why? Because it was Jesus who was being anointed, and he's worth it. And in many ways, we want to be able to say the same thing about a wedding. Every wedding is royal. It justifies the expense. Maybe not every expense, but it's an expensive deal. And well, it should be. This is something God's son, God's daughter are coming together. But then, weddings begin with focus on the groom. Here comes the groom and his entourage. The focus is on them until the back doors open and the bride appears, right? Then the scene shifts. And so it does in this book when we go to chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful. Your eyes behind your veil are doves. Your hair is like a flock of goats descending from the hills of Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep just shorn, coming up from the washing. Each has its twin. Not one of them is alone. Your lips are like a scarlet ribbon. Your mouth is lovely. Your cheeks behind your veil are like the halves of a pomegranate. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built with courses of stone. On it hang 1,000 shields, all of them shields of warriors. Your breasts are like two fawns, like twin fawns of a gazelle that browse among the lilies. until the day breaks and the shadows flee. I will go to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of incense. You are altogether beautiful, my darling. There is no flaw in you." Wow. Every wedding, this would indicate, I believe, is beautiful. This one certainly was. The bride certainly was. But every wedding is beautiful. I've been in ministry over 35 years. I'll bet I've done 100 weddings. There was a stretch of years where I was doing 5 or 6 weddings a year. So I've seen a lot of brides and grooms and wedding venues. And you know what? I've never heard one person take a look at that and say, "This looks terrible." Nobody ever says that. All they say is, "This is just gorgeous. This is just beautiful." Because every wedding is. Every wedding's beautiful, and not just objectively speaking because of all the finery, but subjectively speaking. The bride and the groom are beautiful in each other's eyes, and that's what really matters. And just as this bride has seen her groom, he may as well be King Solomon to me. This groom sees his bride, and he waxes poetic. In fact, this part of the poem is like a subgenre of poetry. In the ancient Middle East, it was called a wasf, W-A-S-F. It's also called, in more modern times, an emblematic blazon. And what you're doing is just declaring the beauty of your beloved. Notice in verse 1, it opens with, "How beautiful you are, my darling." And in verse 7, it ends with, "You are altogether beautiful." And then there are 7 descriptors. That's kind of the rule, kind of like haiku, There are 7 descriptors. That's how many you use. And you draw on beauty around you, like in your environment, in nature, and you liken your bride to that. Now, there's some imagery here that, we might snicker at. We wouldn't use this imagery, but it's not so foreign to us. I mean, my goodness, how many, lovers have called their beloved, something like a fine wine or a fast car? It's not that weird, but in the ancient world, here it goes. Your hair, like a flock of goats descending the hills. It's just long, luscious, cascading hair. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep, newly shorn and washed, perfectly white, and each one has its twin. You got no missing teeth, which is kind of funny to think about, but hey, in the ancient world, with no dentistry or orthodonture, her teeth might really have been truly striking. Her lips, are scarlet ribbon. They're painted red. Her mouth is lovely. The Hebrew word there really speaks of the mouth as the organ of speech. It's probably the sound of her voice is lovely. Her cheeks under her veil are red, like pomegranates. Her neck is like the Tower of David, built up with, courses of stone. Her neck, with all its jewelry on, is stacked up. It's like, you remind me of the Tower of David. And your breasts are like 2 fawns, twin fawns of a gazelle. Beautiful, fragile, shy, rarely seen. And then he stops right there, which is just awesome because this is erotic poetry, no doubt, but without even a hint of the pornographic. In fact, most of his descriptions are about, the neck up. And yes, then he drops his gaze to her breasts. He says a couple of very modest things about her breasts, and then he stops right there. In fact, it strikes me that, what sets this poem off from so much modern poetry and songwriting is this poem ends where a lot of our modern songs begin. And you can flip that and say, this song begins with where a lot of our modern romances end. By that I mean, he's first and foremost captivated by her eyes. The eyes, the window of the soul. He just loves looking into this woman's eyes. And when our romances go bad and marriages fall in hard times, it's probably because we've stopped looking in each other's eyes. It is a powerful thing to gaze into another person's eyes. In fact, researchers have found that if they have people stare at each other into each other's eyes for 5 or 6 minutes, they can virtually make these people fall in love. They're seeing into each other. They're gazing upon each other. And there's all sorts of desire and beauty in this. And these people, they want to hang out together. They want to talk. They want to get to know. They're falling in love just by gazing in the eyes. By the way, if you're all out of love, or if you've lost that loving feeling, stare into each other's eyes again. Do it for 5 minutes. Kurt Thompson, great Christian psychiatrist, says he uses this in therapy with married couples who've been at each other, acting like enemies. It's like, here's what I want you to do. For 5 minutes, I want you to look in your partner's eyes. I want you to look upon them with loving kindness. You might not see love in them. I'm not asking you to see that. I'm not asking you to find it in your own heart. Look on your spouse with loving kindness in your eyes for 5 minutes. And it's like, invariably it starts super awkwardly and people don't want to do it. And almost always by the end, they don't want to stop. And they're finding in the eyes, in the soul of their partner, the person they fell in love with a long time ago, and they realize they could do it again. So every wedding is beautiful like that. But now another section. I want to read a lengthier section for 8 through 15. Let's hear these words from the Lord. Come with me from Lebanon, my bride. Come with me from Lebanon. Descend from the crest of Amana, from the top of Senir, the summit of Hermon, from the lion's dens and the mountain haunts of leopards. You've stolen my heart, my sister, my bride. You've stolen my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace. How beautiful is your love, my sister, my bride. How much more pleasing is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your perfume more than any spice. Your lips drop sweetness as the honeycomb, my bride. Milk and honey are under your tongue. The fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. You are a garden locked up, my sister, my bride. You are a spring enclosed, a sealed fountain. Your plants are an orchard of pomegranates with choice fruits, with henna and nard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with every kind of incense tree, with myrrh and aloes and all the finest spices. You are a garden fountain, a well of flowing water streaming down from Lebanon. Okay, there are a lot of points I could make from this, but I want to make one primary point, and that is this. Every wedding is legal. Every wedding is covenantal. And I draw that up simply from the fact that the word bride occurs in this passage. My bride, it's actually 6 times in this text. Half the time it says, my sister, my bride, which that might sound weird, but really it's just saying that this is not just a romantic relationship. There's something fraternal and familial in this. You're not just my bride, but I also love you and know you as a sister. Sisters and brothers often know each other better than anyone else in the world. We've probably all seen that movie, where something goes bad in the romance and you call your brother or you call your sister because they get me, they know me, they understand me, maybe even better than your parents do. And so they've put in the work to build a real deep bond. It's not just driven by passion, but it's really a deep, intimate connection. There's been an emotional connection. There's been thoroughgoing knowledge of each other. You're my sister, my bride. Reminds us too that, by the way, that's the nature of our relationships before we marry. We're brothers and sisters in God's family. We treat each other accordingly. And marriage is only for this life till death do us part. And then forever and ever, we're brothers and sisters again. So that relationship supersedes all. But it calls her, not only my sister, but my bride. Bride. That clearly implies that promises have been made, covenants have been entered into, binding oaths have been pledged in public company, and now these two are really married. A lot of times people cynically say, I don't need a piece of paper to tell me that I love you. And I will freely grant the point. You don't. But what you do need is a piece of paper, a marriage license built on covenants and promises and oaths that will keep you loving your spouse because of your own fickle heart. My goodness, sometimes we feel like all I can do is be swept away by my heart. I fell in love that way. I could certainly fall out of love that way. But with promises, we bind our hearts. And ironically, it's not constricting and confining, like, oh my goodness, now you've blown it. You've entered into a marriage. Now you're like just stuck with this person. No, what if actually making covenants and promises was freeing and kind of enlarging and didn't make you subservient? It actually granted you dominion. The late theologian Lewis Smedes states it this way, provocatively, that promising is the power to control the future. Now, you can't literally control the future, but by promising, you control who you are going to be into the future. By making promises, you're taking dominion in many ways over yourself into your future. You're saying, I am not going to be led by my fickle emotions. I'm not going to be waylaid by changing circumstances. I'm not going to even be led astray by maybe my own changing thoughts or personal styles. No, I'm the person who is going to be there no matter what. I'm taking you to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. Ain't none of that's going to change anything. I'm going to love, honor, and cherish you until death do us part. So help me God. And then we do it. It's actually ennobling. It's freeing. It's enlarging to be able to say this and do this. And it keeps us through thick and thin. Just like God's covenant promises to us are forever binding and guaranteed to be fulfilled. Lewis Smedes says of his own wife, my wife has been married to at least 5 different men, all of them me. I change over the years, but she's still married to me and I'm still there for her. Every wedding is legal and binding. And then, finally, every wedding is sexual, delightfully sexual. And we come to 4:16 and 5:1. I want to read these verses and comment. Awake, north wind, and come, south wind. Blow on my garden, that its fragrance may spread everywhere. Let my beloved come into his garden and taste its choice fruits. And he says, I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk. And the community says, eat, friends, and drink. Drink your fill of love. Every wedding, every marriage is supposed to be at least delightfully sexual. And what's amazing here is these 2 verses are the literal center of the song. There are 111 lines of poetry before these verses and 111 lines after these verses. But right here in the center of the Holy of Holies is true matrimony in all its physical fullness. I mean, we cleave unto our spouse first by making promises and taking binding oaths. But then we consummate the marriage. Then it becomes full and fulfilled in every way. And the wedding is delightfully sexual. Finally, there. Marriage is the context for sex. Not before. Before this, he actually says of this woman that you are a locked garden and a sealed fountain. You've honored your body. You've protected it from everybody else, including me on my weakest days. You've kept the garden locked. You've kept the fountain sealed. But now, because of that, we can go in and we can enjoy all the fruit and all the wine. Because we've kept the little foxes out, everything's been able to mature. And now we can enjoy it most fully. And so I would just remind us all that this really is God's design for marriage. We make the promises and then we consummate them. Hebrews 13:4, marriage should be honored by all and the marriage bed kept pure. For God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. He's really serious about this. And it reminds us to be utterly serious about it too. But then, before that puts us under a heap of condemnation, because we probably haven't kept ourselves as pure as we could or should, because we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, where does that leave us? I mean, here's an ideal portrait of marriage and romantic love, and we know from Ephesians 5:32 that it's really just an icon of the great mystery of Christ and His church. How are we ever going to live up to that? Well, consider this. If all of our marriages are icons of Christ and His love for the church, what kind of church has Christ married? Has He married a perfect people? Has He married a spotless bride? When have we ever been perfect, except maybe like the first 5 minutes of human history at the end of Genesis 2? When have we ever been perfect? No, Christ comes and marries a flawed, imperfect bride. So He comes to us not just with like sort of romantic, idealized marrying love, but self-sacrificing, redeeming love. Paul says that too in Ephesians chapter 5, that Christ loved the church and gave Himself up for her to make her holy. She wasn't before, but He's going to make her holy. To cleanse her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to Himself as a radiant church, glorious, without blemish. We don't make ourselves that way. God makes us that way. Christ makes us that way. And so I'll say this last word about every wedding and every marriage. Every wedding is amazingly graceful. It's amazingly graceful. And it has to be, because the only person available for you and for me to marry is another sinner. That's the only kind of person we'll ever get to unite with, is another deeply flawed human being. But by God's grace, we find each other. And by His grace, we fall for each other. And by His grace, we remain faithful to each other as long as we both shall live. Every wedding is amazingly graceful. Most notably, Christ's wedding with us. So be encouraged, flawed and fallen people, all of us. Jesus loves us anyway. And it's His love, His very love for us, that begins to change us and transform us and write a new and better story for us as we walk with Him. And with that, I want to introduce you to Ian and Talia Doyle. Take a look at their story.
I wanted to get married, from the time I was a little girl, but I wasn't the kind of little girl that dreamed about her wedding dress and her wedding from the time, she was 5. I cared a lot, but at the same time, that wasn't end goal. So I was excited for our wedding day, but I was excited to be married to Ian. So wedding day was just a means of marrying Ian. Ian, you should go on the other side of the slide. There you go. It's wet.
It's wet?
Yeah, he got in the water from the pig plant. My name's Talia. I grew up in Landenberg. I spent most of my life around here.
My name's Ian Doyle. I grew up in Louisiana and moved here in 2021. We met at a Christian camping conference center called Sandy Cove in Maryland. They were running a year-long leadership internship program there, and we both ended up taking that on.
The first thing that I remember is I was walking down and Ian came by in his car. He's like, "Hey, you want to ride?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I got to talk to him in the car. And that was the first thing that I remember is a nice guy who offered me a ride. The thing that I remember the most that we kind of bonded over or connected right away with was there was just a lot of similarities in our personalities, just like the way that we operated. Like one thing, this is super random. When I eat ice cream, I like to kind of like squish it around and get it in between a liquid and a solid state. And I caught Ian doing the same thing. I was like, what are you doing to your ice cream? Because anybody else who looks at you is like, why? Do you even like ice cream? And that's how Ian likes his ice cream too. I was like, wow, he understands me.
Yep. You don't do it that often anymore, but she used to scratch her nose with like both of her hands at a time like this. And it was like such a chipmunk thing to do. And that was something that I noticed right away. I was like, wow, that's cute. We caught on to be fast friends. Ended up talking a lot about, family life and growing up and relationships within family. A couple months in, we were both feeling really drawn to each other in more than a friendship kind of way, but we definitely were not honest with ourselves about it or each other. I was dating someone at the time, but at the same time, Talia, gave me some comfort outside of a really bad relationship that I needed at the time, some friendship in that way.
I didn't even face my feelings for Ian for a very long time because that wasn't even a possibility. I ruled out the possibility of having feelings because he was in a relationship. So like subconsciously and just like shut it down. He's like, nope, he's just my friend, really good friend. And that went on. We met in late August, September, and that went on through the winter.
We started the program in August 2014, and in January 2015, I found out that my then girlfriend was pregnant.
And then I think it was Ian who reached out to me after the fact and was like, he kind of apologized for just leaving abruptly, no explanation. And we started a little bit of a back and forth. And I think it was you who initiated. You wanted to talk. You wanted to tell me about what was going on. We set up a time. Ian came, and that was a really hard conversation because we processed through like the reality of our feelings for each other, and then like Ian's reality and the season of life that he was in. So from there, we tried to stay out of contact, but we didn't do a very good job of it. It was probably a full year of playing this game of being out of contact for a couple weeks or a couple months, and then we would either run into each other because we had overlapping circles of friends, and then that would kind of just kick off the cycle again. It would kind of lead into this pattern of just more feelings kind of being expressed and kind of going down like a rabbit hole of just kind of unhealth. Like we had a position in each other's life that just was not appropriate.
Like I said before, I was in a relationship before I met Talia, and the relationship just continued to be emotionally, verbally abusive. And about 10 days after my son was born in October of 2015, I ended that relationship and continued on my own. God disassembled a lot of my beliefs in that time. Life has gone downhill, and a lot of it's my fault, and a lot of it feels like it's not in any sort of control. And with Talia and with myself, realizing that I was not helping Talia in any way by continuing to be around, being close and trying to be in any kind of relationship, be in contact.
I know from my end, I felt like, even though it wasn't intentional, I felt manipulated at times just because of where Ian was at.
I prayed to God at a point where I didn't even know if he was there. I said, God, I'm gonna keep holding on because I don't know what I would do if I didn't. And if you're there, you'll catch me and you'll tell me about yourself. So God was faithful, and he built up a lot of my faith. He took me through the book of John, and I saw things that I had never read or understood before. And I, for real, for the first time, let go of Talia, and and was okay being on my own.
I ended up moving to San Diego. I was only there for like 6 months, but it took me moving as well. Me moving across the country and kind of starting from scratch, not having anybody for me to let go. And then moving back home with my parents, that stirred up a lot in me, a lot of growth, a lot of challenge. Yeah, through that, I just feel like my faith was also tested and kind of made true in the end, deciding to cling to God and Him never letting go of me.
We got back into contact because I came across a video of a ferret, which Talia and I had really bonded over ferrets when we first met. And I found this video and I was like, there's no way I can't send this to Talia because it was great. It was a good video. So I sent it with like all the caveat of like please, like I'm not trying to start anything, like I'm just sending this along.
So when Ian got in touch with me after like a couple of years of no contact, and I was just coming off of one of the darkest seasons of my life, and I struggled a lot with deep depression and anxiety. We had some small talk for a couple of days, and then we did immediately go into having like pretty intentional conversation and kind of talking through our past and what that meant for now. And we decided that we were both comfortable with moving forward, talking honest about the fact that we both deep down would love to pursue something other than a friendship. But if we were going to do that, we needed to take it real slow. And there was a lot that we were going to have to work through. For almost a full year, we did conversations for the most part over long distance, video call or phone call or text messages and stuff.
We dated for around 3 years, and then we started talking about getting married in 2020. From the beginning, had agreed to just talk through everything and be very vocal and intentional about what we were aiming for.
We got engaged October of 2021, and then we planned and got married within 5 months.
Yeah.
Our first dance was longer than we expected.
It was a whole song.
It was all of Live and Rose by Louis Armstrong, including the 2-minute intro. Yep. And it was awful.
Yep.
The thing that I have come away with most of all in our story is just God. He always orchestrating something bigger. Over the course of the last 10 years, who God has made me and who Ian was and who Ian is now, 2 totally different people. And I'm so glad that I get to marry the Ian that's now rather than the Ian that I met 8-9 years ago.
God was faithful to me to take me through some of the hardest things I've dealt with to get me to a place where I was okay. And more importantly, I was in a place where I trusted God on my own.
Thanks for checking out our online teaching. If you enjoyed this content and would like some more information about us, head over to our website at www.willowdalechapel.org or download our app. There you can stay up to date on any events, ministries, and other opportunities we have coming up at Willowdale Chapel.